the finalising the annual budget plan for 2022-23, and I'll invite our Finance Manager of Strategy, Steve Patterson. Thank you, Steve, to do a brief presentation to us and obviously answer any questions. Page 41 of your papers, councillors. Steve, over to you.
Yes, good morning, Mr Mayor and councillors. The process of adopting an annual plan, as you know, the annual budget, is one that takes a few months, and we're nearly there, I hope. This stage of the process is where we are presenting to you today the outcomes of your deliberations back on the 26th and 27th of last month. And so all this that the documents do is to reflect those decisions of yours and to request that you approve them so that they can be adopted formally at the meeting at the end of the month. In terms of the process, we've circulated the draft of the budget document, and I know when I've since read through it again that there are the odd little typo and things that we'll fix when it comes to publication, and I will mention a couple of minor things where I've noticed that I'll take responsibility where I've left a tiny thing or two out that needs to be added or corrected, and I'll do that in a moment. But in broad terms, you were faced with significant challenges at the last meeting, recognising the feedback you'd had from the public, something that we knew really before it was out for public consultation really, that there would be concern as to the way in which the rates would fall for the coming year. So at your last meeting you addressed ways of moderating that, of reflecting that public concern, and those things are, as I said, all itemised in the document that's in front of you, the changes that you approved. In terms of the updated position, there is still a significant program of work that's planned to be done, and I guess a challenge as to whether we're going to be capable of delivering the services within the budget, given the inflationary pressures there are on all sorts of things at the moment. And I have to say, when I've been listening to the media in the last few days and thinking about the changes in the interest rates, at least just for one of the things that we face, we've made assumptions about what the interest costs might be on the council's debt, and you've changed those, increased those a bit, but whether they'll be enough to cover off what actually happens in the end, who can be sure. But there is certainly a volatile marketplace out there, and you've been aware of that as you've adopted, approved where you've got to so far in the process. In the report itself, I tried to summarise the outcome of your deliberations for last time in terms of the overall picture for rates, with a rates increase in terms of the total rates income that the council needs moving to 5.8% from the 8.3% that was consulted on, and to show the key elements of those things that you approved, including the changes to the structure of the differential rating system and the uniform annual general charge. And the interesting thing to me, I guess, in terms of assessing the effects of those changes, that is the reduction in the total required, the changes to the differential and the changes to uniform annual general charge, mean that the total rates that we're going to seek from each of those sectors is roughly similar for 22-23 as what we've sought in 21-22. So that's at the high level in terms of the group, but it's obviously not so at the individual level, and it wouldn't be expected to be so because of the changes in the base on which we're charging. And I just repeat, in terms of my explanations about that in the past, it is sensible for us to have a reset every 3 years of the base we're using because the city changes, the makeup of the city changes during that time. And it's not that usual that the extent of the change is so significant as it has been this time. And it could be that, with all else being equal, in 3 years' time, that there's not a lot of movement in terms of the base that we use because of the way in which the values are settling down now. But that's for another day. What the graphs show in terms of this report is that there will still be, in the residential sector, properties that experience reasonably significant increases, and those graphs identify that. And there will be situations where individuals in other sectors, like the non-residential sector, have an increase that's reasonably significant by comparison to the rest. But again, that's due to the revaluation effects of the changing incidence of their rates. In terms of the changes, or the additions, if you like, to the document itself, I'd just like to point out a couple of things where I'd noticed some things that were missing. And one of those is on page 63 of the document, where we tried to just list out all of the changes that you'd approved at the last meeting. And you'll be aware that one of the approaches was to suggest that there were a number of programs that would be funded from the expected cash surplus from the current year. And one of those was a new program that the committee itself, or one of the previous committees, had talked about, and that was a traffic and parking bylaw review for 30,000, and that's not mentioned on that page as being one of the things that was added, so we'll fix that so that that's added. On page 69, where there's an introduction to the forecast financial statements, in one of the paragraphs there on the last column, it talks about the amount that's going to be funded from that operating surplus, and it mentions that it would be 1.25 million. That's a mistake. It should say 1.45 million in the top paragraph on the right-hand-most column on that page. So elsewhere in the document it talks about the correct figure of 1.45, but that's the case there. And on the following page, on page 70 of the agenda, it had been our intention to expand the way in which we'd shown the expenses to show a slightly bigger breakdown of that. And unfortunately, we overlooked doing that on this copy that was circulated to you, and so we intend to do that in the final version. So, Mr. Mayor and Councillors, that's my intro, and if you've got any questions, I'll try to address them, or the troops around me will.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. I just have one question, really. So we've proposed reducing the UAGC, altering the differentials, using the surplus, and we've reduced the overall spending.
Yes.
Is there anything else that we could do that we haven't done to reduce the impact of valuations on residential ratepayers?
In my opinion, no. We've exhausted the range of options that are available to us.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just to follow up from that question, when you say there's nothing further, is reducing the costs not something that would have an impact?
The councillor said that reducing the cost was one of those elements, and yes, it is one of the things you've done. If you reduced it further, that would obviously have an impact, yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, Steve, thanks for the further information that has been provided. In regards to, I guess, what I identified as being an increase in costs, just trying to get an understanding of that. In the breakdown that you've provided, the 4.29 million of other expenses increase, I'm just wanting to understand a little bit about the main two components of that. The first one being the 2.7 carry forward, the operational carry forward, in particular those two items, the digital transformation and the ERP. So in that area for those two programs, the existing budget as well as the carry forwards for those two programs adds up to 7 million operational. And originally that those two programs had been spread over 2 years. And I'm just wondering, is it necessary for us to include all 7 million in 1 year, or could that be spread over 2 years, being 22-23 and 23-24? Is that an option to us?
Yes, I think there are two aspects to it that I see. One is in terms of the actual operating expenditure that's showing there. The work hasn't been done in the current year, so it is going to be transferred into next year, and that does mean that there will be costs that are shown as part of the operating costs. But in terms of the way in which it's funded, that's not impacting on the rates for the 22-23 year, because we assumed that it was going to be funded across time, and so I think we believe that what we've got in terms of the way in which it's shown is an appropriate timing for the work that's planned to be done. And there's little to be gained, I think, from trying to change those figures at the moment, from a rating perspective at least.
Okay. And all of the 7 million has to be operational. Can none of that be capitalised expenses?
Yes, we went through that issue back in the beginning to decide whether or not that could be capitalised, and the on-balance decision was it couldn't, but it was reasonable to consider spreading the cost over, well, in our case we assumed 7 years would be a reasonable life for the amount of effort that was gone to, but it formally, in an accounting sense, didn't qualify to be considered as capital.
Okay. The second component is the 1.7 million, which is, the description here is reduction in recoveries from capitalised labour. Now, I understand that was a portion of the 2 million that was reduced in salaries, and the 300,000 operational, and 1.7 was of the capitalised portion of that. However, I'm trying to understand why, if it's a capitalised expense, why it is included as an additional expense. And this, you know, it looks to me like it's being included as an operational 1.7 operational expense.
It's certainly a very complex area to try to describe, and in this environment even more so probably. But let's have a go. The operating expenditure, and I'll get someone, if I tell it wrongly, to correct me, but my understanding of the position is this. The operating section there, which talks about operating costs, includes the total cost, if you like, of salary and wages, of remuneration. And then we reduced that by the in terms of the way it's reflected there, by the portion that was going to be recovered, if you like, by being charged out to capital projects. Now, because what we're saying is that we can't recover, or that there would be $1.7 million worth of that reduction that was going to be related to capital projects, and we're not going to get that recovery anymore, that we have to reduce what we consider to be our net operating costs by that amount. Or should I say increase the net operating costs by that amount, because we're not getting the recovery from from that capitalised labour. So we've effectively shown the $2 million reduction in the salary and wage portion, but we're saying the other costs where we're showing the recovery are going up because we're not getting that return.
So if those costs are covered by debt, though, why do they need to be identified as an additional expense in an operational sense?
In the end, if the work was being, if you were able to charge it out to capital and it was funded from debt, yes, you would sow it that way, but it is still saying that the way it's accounted for, we're not going to get that level of recovery from it being charged to CapEx, and so it means it's going to end up being an increase in our operating costs. It's just that we're not getting the recovery any longer.
Okay, I'll leave that one. Doesn't fully make sense.
No, it is complex. I appreciate that.
Okay, and just the next question I have is around the delivery of our capital program, and the update was that we've delivered 39.2 as at the end of May, and there wasn't an estimate for what we might have as year end. But I recollect previously, come August, usually there's some carry forwards that need to happen. I think it was 4 million this year. Do we have any sort of estimate as to the size of that carry forward, given that we don't seem to be delivering according to what was originally expected?
I'll make one brief comment, and then obviously the GM of infrastructure would like to make a comment as well. In terms of our accounting process, it is our process to come back to you after the end of the year to identify the actual expenditure that there has been up to the 30th of June, and to seek to have your approval to amend what we've considered to be the carry forwards that we have as part of the budget, and then to modify the budget to reflect that. And so that's our standard practice, and we'd expect to do the same this time. At the present time, we don't, at a corporate level, have an updated assessment of what those carry forwards would be. We spent a lot of time and effort trying to give you an assessment in time for the meetings at the end of May. And Sarah may make a comment in a moment, but in terms of formally at the council highest level, we don't have a picture of what that might be. If it happened to be higher than what we've currently assumed, then that obviously would mean that it would be showing as having a capital program for the year that's higher than what we've currently got in the books.
And just to check, what we've currently assumed, is that 65 million?
Sorry, what? 65 million of what?
What is it that we're currently assuming that we will deliver?
There's that, I haven't got the figures right in front of me, but in terms of...
Through the chair.
Yes.
Steve's correct. If you look at the Committee of Council agenda for the 26th of May, page 26 of that agenda covers the defined carry forwards. That was a capital new of 29 million and capital renewal of 4.2 million. Those were the things that we were saying are committed. So we've either got contracts in place or finalising the procurement process. Our figures haven't changed since then, because we got the most up-to-date figures literally the Friday that your papers were published. We are still starting projects. I'm just about to send you an email of another project that's starting next week. So we are still starting projects. So just to reassure you that the spend is continuing and the initiation of projects is continuing. So we will have, I think, quite a bit more expenditure by the end of this financial year.
Yeah, so I'm aware of all of that, and I'm aware of the information that was provided in May. The question that I'm asking is, 39 million has been delivered. What would be the full amount of delivery for us to have no carry forwards past the end of June? Is it 65 million, or is it less than that?
Through the chair, some of our carry forward, particularly in growth, has moved not to this current year, but to the year after.
Sorry, perhaps I'm not being clear. I fully understand the carry forwards, and I fully understand what's been carried forward to 22-23 and what's been carried forward to 23-24. What I'm asking is the amount that's not carried forward, that's still in the 21-22 year, that we would be expecting to deliver. What's the full amount?
Pass you on to the head of PMO for that. We're expecting, as you know, we're expecting quite a peak towards, well, for June, we're expecting quite a peak. And we've just done an update for the Chief Exec's report. Have we not? No. So we're just going to go through the system and get back to you on that one.
Perhaps come back to me if it's that difficult to answer. I'm sure others have got questions as well.
Mr Mayor, I think it is true, though, that the 64 million in the budget is the capital sum that we currently have in the budget, including the sum that's the carry forward for delivery this year, and that together with the renewals of just over nearly 33 million means that the total capital program that's currently in the budget is 96.7 million, and that has all those various components that...
We understand that, Steve. I think what the councillor's asking, is there any more than the 96.7? And we're just not getting a straight answer. So can I ask the officers if they could find that out for us? You've got 2 weeks of the financial year left. I think you could get that answer.
Yeah, through the chair, no, we're not expecting any more than the 96.7. We will get back to you to confirm any minutiae, but we're really not expecting that to change.
Thank you.
Okay, just one more quick, just a small detail on page 41. It had the Lido backwash. Originally that was 996,000, but it's got in our new documents as 300,000. Has that been reduced?
At the last meeting, the manager of that area indicated to us that they'd found a solution that they hadn't originally been aware might be possible. So yes, the cost is reduced.
Thank you. That's good to know. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. Just a question arising, and a single question arising from pages 63 and 64 of the agenda, which is 13 and 14 of the annual budget. In this part, we kind of seem to try to respond to the community feedback, and I'm just wondering if we have the balance right here, I guess, basically, because it seems to me that a lot of the intensity that came through the submissions process was actually around those changes, ultimately what gave rise to the changes in the differentials and the changes in the UAGC. And we kind of addressed that in 2 sentences and nothing visual in page 13. And then we kind of have a page and a half of line items that we've made tweaks to. My question is, given that we've actually got a lot of good graphic representation of kind of the distributions and what's been changed from the proposal through to the final, could we make some of that more clear here so that the very large community of interest that was concerned about the ratings impact can see the difference that was made through the decisions?
I guess that might be possible. What I tried to do in writing this section was to get to a little bit about the rates in there to try to make sure, because that traditionally hasn't been something that we've necessarily put on this sort of page and reflecting on what had been done. You're right, it's summarised into a couple of paragraphs at the moment. Whether we could do something visually that would show the picture, I'm not sure. I'd have to contemplate what would be the best answer to deliver that thing. You're right, we have got a lot of graphs, but it's a matter of which one we might drag out to actually stick in this document.
Indeed. So just in terms of process then, I see that one of the recommendations is around delegating sign-off to the mayor and deputy. Often that language has been around minor changes rather than sign-off. Is that effectively the same thing?
That's effectively the same thing, yes.
And-
In terms of whether putting a graph in would be considered to be that or not?
Well, we're first trying to establish whether that recommendation has scope for minor changes in it.
Minor, usually minor is meaning sort of typos and just things that are missing, that might need to be fixed, like the thing I mentioned at the start, as opposed to anything fundamental.
And is your view that including some visual information to document the change that we've made to the distribution of rates is a more than minor change and would need direction from council?
I suspect we could cover that under the delegation, but it is, the extent to which I don't see us as wanting to make any significant changes, and it would depend. If it was just one small graph or something, it might be possible that we could incorporate that, but if it was anything more than that, I would think not. That was not something that we would, because the reality is we've got a very limited time to do what we've got to do here, and very limited resource.
Thank you.
I'll just ask our acting to speak, please.
Through the chair, I think for clarity and certainty, it would be best dealt with through an amendment, councillor.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. I've just got a question around, I guess I'm wondering around any effects of decision-making that could trigger some of the proposed alignments with timing that we currently have in here. So specifically, we don't have the final stage of the civic and cultural precinct master plan in here, but there are multiple pieces of work that we have deferred to align with the timing of that. And so in terms of the impact of the plan as it stands, it's relying on a decision that hasn't yet been made around the inclusion of a piece of work. Do we need to review the timelines of those deferrals if the final stage isn't approved?
Well,
hopefully you know what I mean.
Yeah, sort of. In terms of the recommendation from your committee to this committee about that cultural and civic and cultural precinct work, that's obviously not included in the document at the moment and would require something actively done from this meeting to include that. If that's not included, then yes, you're right, there are the odd programs that I think have been deferred, awaiting an alignment with outcomes from that, and whether they're significant enough for us to have to try to sort them out now, or whether we can just leave them the way they are and address them at a later time, I'm not sure. I suspect, given where we are in the process, we'd prefer just to leave things the way they are and address them if they're consequential things at a later time.
Okay, thank you. And then in terms of, just off the top of your head, are there any other decisions that are in a similar situation, or would that just be the main one that has triggered deferrals that still requires a decision?
I'm not personally aware of anything, but others maybe. I got to grips with a number of things that are in the budget, but I don't know whether I've...
no, that's fine. That was the only one I picked up on, but I just wanted to check that I hadn't missed something. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, are there any other questions of Steve? No. I've just got one for around the capital program to you, Sarah, just around the confidence of delivering what will effectively be nearly $100 million worth of capital next year, when every other council that I'm aware of in the country is pulled back rather than being much, much more ambitious, just because of the climate out there. So we're going to be boxing on with a very ambitious program.
Through the chair, Mr. Mayor. Firstly, I really acknowledge your scepticism based on previous years and on the COVID environment. We have been significantly affected this year by COVID, and by the way that we used to do things. And to reassure you, we've spent a lot of the last year changing how we do things to give us more certainty in these uncertain times. So our budget, I acknowledge, looks big because it's got a chunk of carry forward from this year. We talked at the last meeting on the 26th about the hockey stick that comes with the end of financial year expenditure, essentially moving 3 months into next year because of the implications of all of the different COVID delays we've been experiencing through the year. We reiterated at the time that that's already in contract. 90% of it is in contract. If you add to the fact that because we've changed how we do things, that Thornton Hogan are locked into a contract, we've got our in-house workforce, but we've also got the design team planning to bring our designs in earlier so that we get more certainty of delivery and better cost certainty, I've got to say. So we've got all of that. That means that we've actually got 60 million of that 100 million budget already locked in, either in procurement or actually under contract already. So yes, you know, that gives us...
So it's a yes, you can deliver it?
It's a yes.
Okay.
It's a yes. And just to reassure you, that's not an optimistic yes. It's a yes because we've changed things to help us deliver it.
So why is every other TA doing it differently, including your former employer?
I understand through the chair, and this is purely my speculation, I understand the pressure that other entities, that we are all in, that the rates are in and stuff like that. I think that what was unusual for us is that because we've been a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of how we do procure and manage, maybe the others aren't carrying over such a large amount. So ours looks big, but our actual budget for next year is capital new is only 34 million. You know, so for our city, that's not a huge amount of money. It's just the fact that we've added into that I suppose it's the market.
So you think the market forces are there to deliver it all?
We're certainly getting pestered. I know we've talked about some of the challenges of getting people to bid for work, but at the same time, because we've been talking to the market about the forthcoming work to help secure it, some of our bigger contracts, we're getting pestered on a weekly basis, asking when we're going out to tender. You know, the economy does, to an extent, really rely on construction to keep things...
So you said that we've got 90% of it procured, and I forget what the figure was, but you're assuming that the market will be able to double up and continue to do the business as usual as well. Otherwise, you're still going to be behind the 8 ball come 3 months down the track.
That's a really good question. So the stuff that we've got in delivery, in procurement at the moment, we're assuming most of that, some of it is longer term, but a lot of it will be done by Christmas. The period up to Christmas will be us getting into procurement, the 40 million that isn't in procurement yet, to deliver over the second half of the year. So,
and that's assuming that those contractors are not busy after Christmas.
But we know they're not, because some of them, they're expressing interest in our bigger jobs already. I think one of the challenges for the market about locking in our big tenders is that it leaves people who we used to spread the work over more hungry for work. So we are genuinely getting people expressing or chasing, when are you going to get this out to procurement? When are you going to get this out to procurement? So yeah, I'm relatively confident, as far as confident as we can be, that the market is interested.
You're aware that some market forces have changed just in the last week, with some staff moving out of the region on other jobs?
Through the chair, I am aware of that. I've actually scheduled a meeting with Civil Contractors, which I think Civil Contractors New Zealand, which is at the beginning of July, to go through our plan with them to make sure they've got the visibility of what's coming over the year. That's the Manawatu branch, so that we get that local visibility and the local interest in what we do.
Okay, I'll leave it a comment. Councillor Harpiter.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Steve. Following on from the Deputy Mayor's question about anything else, are you aware of anything in the IT or the finance project that is anything new from the recent visits to Australia, that is anything that needs to be brought to the table that we have been made aware of from a financial point of view?
Not from a financial point of view, no.
So there's no extra budgets that we need to be aware of going forward?
These are multi-year projects, and so for the current year, the budget's appropriate for what we need to do in the current year.
So there's going to be no surprises going forward?
Oh, well, not that I'm aware of, and from a budgetary perspective, no.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, councillors, there's no more questions. Thank you, Steve, and other officers. So look, councillors, what I intend to do is move the substantive first without any amendments, and then bring the amendments to the table. Then we've got a starting point. So just making that really clear. Otherwise, we're all over the place. So we've got number 1, which is around the council adopt the annual plan 2022-23. We'll then come in incorporating any amendments and then the other recommendations thereafter. So I'm looking for a seconder. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Look, I think it's been well debated and well signalled that we've got some challenges. To date, the staff have done an excellent job of bringing things to us, and you as councillors have fully debated what can be in and what can be out, what can be deferred. I'll leave some comments specifically around the capital project because I still have real concerns. And as of this last week, contractors moving out of the region to chase bigger work and others that are on much, much bigger utility projects and transportation projects leaves us quite thin on the ground to deliver what is going to be our most ambitious program ever in capital. So I'll leave that specifically to that. But before we go to the vote, I'll ask for any other comments.
Excuse me, Mr Mayor, sorry, just a point of clarification around the process.
Yep.
You said that we were going to move the substantive motion and then amendments would follow. Can I just clarify whether you are taking them as additional recommendations or amendments? Because if they're amendments, it limits people's ability, understanding orders to comment on other items.
It'll be amendments.
It will be amendments?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Councillor Naylor.
Can I just ask for some further clarification for that? Because traditionally with annual budget, there have been additional recommendations so that we're not constricted by the standing order that restricts someone from putting an amendment forward if it's if a previous one has failed. So the clarity that was provided for the last annual budget debate was that they would be individual recommendations, and I'd ask that that practice could be continued through to this process, please.
Thank you. Just getting a bit of advice there on what we'd had done in the past. This is a break from what we'd done in the past. So I'm going to take this off the table and we'll go to the additional recommendations first. Look, it doesn't really matter. We get there in the end. But to be fair to people, I've just got some advice that this is a break from what we have done previously. Just signalling, I prefer this process because it is. We've already been through the debate. somewhat. But in order to follow what we've done previously, and I appreciate that people are probably expecting something different. So I'm going to take it off the table, and I'll go to any additional recommendations from, and I know Councillor Naylor, you've got one, but are there any? I've got a number of people wishing to speak. Is this around this? Okay, Councillor Barrett.
Sorry, it's a little bit hard to use non-verbal communication here. I'm in the queue with an additional recommendation.
Okay, all right. And Councillor Dennison, you were...
I've, aside from all the ones that have been indicated earlier, I think we also had to deal with the 220 from, that's not included currently with a recommendation at some point too, but if that's covered, okay, thank you.
Or we do or we don't. And the Deputy Mayor.
I'm in the queue to move the Civic and Cultural Precinct recommendation.
Okay, all right. Okay, we'll go to you first, Councillor Naylor, because you were in the queue first. Councillor Naylor.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to move a recommendation to, I'm not sure if our officers have got it there, but to reduce the overall capital program by $15 million. That's been seconded by the Mayor. So I acknowledge the huge amount of work that was done a few weeks ago, to change some structures and reduce some spend and get the rates down to 5.8%. However, it was really quite a shock to me to look at the numbers when our papers came to us to see that actually our overall costs had increased by 1.7 million, and the requirement for our capital had increased by 8 million. This all puts us into a more challenging financial position going forward. But aside from that, looking at the overall capital program, we've actually, from our annual budget, increased that from around 93 or 94 million up to 96 million. So really what our community was asking us to do was to reduce costs and reduce our capital program. I think in terms of the integrity that we should have to our community, we should deliver on what we say we will deliver as close as possible. And to do this, we need a realistic plan. At the moment, I don't believe the plan is realistic. I haven't had the answers from officers to understand perhaps how much we might be expecting to be looking at in terms of carry forwards come August, but I suspect there might be a few more million added on to what we've already got. The impact of COVID and supply issues will not simply stop at the end of June. Those of us who are aware of the projections, this year is going to be a difficult year in terms of community health, and the impacts of COVID and other illnesses will have an impact on staff and contractors' ability to deliver a capital program. I think it makes a whole lot more sense for us to look at something that is actually deliverable. I do not believe that 96 million plus is deliverable. As you're aware, we've delivered 39 million so far this year. That's 37% of our $104 million capital program. And going well this month, I'd expect we might arrive around 40 to 45%. That's not something that I want to see repeated going forward, and I think the best way for us to improve on our deliverability is to actually have a realistic plan. So the 15 million is really around about 25% of the capital program that is outlined as increased levels of service, and that's outlined in on page 142. There's about 4.5 million to meet additional demand, 59.5 million to improve the level of service, and 32.5 million to replace existing assets. So the intention of this resolution is really to target the reductions around those programs that are to improve the level of service. With the big carry forward of around 28 or 29 million, what we've got in many programs is a one-year program plus a significant carry forward. So I think, there's some clear, logical places that can be looked at for immediate reductions. I had considered going, putting some things forward on the table to go through line by line, but ultimately, I think officers and the CE are in the best position to be able to identify what is realistic in terms of delivery and prioritise accordingly. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Just checking, everybody in the queue wants to speak about this? Right, okay. All right, great. Look, I'll carry on from Councillor Naylor. Look, a couple of weeks ago I canvassed the CEOs of New Zealand cities at a meeting I was at in Auckland, and then again at the Metro, LGNZ Metro meeting, just to understand where the market was and where people were. And look, everything we've heard about the ambition and everything's great, but reality is a different thing. The average is around 50% of completion around the country, 50 to 60% depending on who you're talking to nationally. All, and I repeat, all are paring back just because there isn't the capacity there to do the work. We are going in a totally different direction. And as Councillor Naylor said, this is just pulling it back to a much more realistic nature. I guarantee we'll be back here again with a very average percentage completion rate, and possibly with a whole lot of rework because we're trying to push things through, and having a target is just the completion rate, which is it should be about doing the work properly in a timely manner and to a good quality of workmanship. We've already seen some average workmanship around some of our projects. It's really about, their office were being really realistic around completing the work, even some of our neighbours. So, look, we've got contractors here, and our city has increased some of that with the change of our contract. Be fair to say, though, that our contractors are pulled in different directions as well, with major projects here. There's actually more staff working up on the new highway and at Ohaki than there is in the city. And we've just seen some changes to some competitors actually moving staff out of the city. So there's many competing projects, whether it be utilities, transportation, major construction. So we don't have all of those contractors at our fingertips. In fact, we don't have a lot of them, to be fair. So I just think this is foolish going ahead with an absolutely ambitious program when the winds of the market are telling you totally different, and the colleagues around our sector are doing something quite different. So I think we would still have a budget there of possibly nearly $80 million to complete. We've never done that before. So, even with this reduction, it's going to be a stretch target. So very foolish to continue with where we're going on it. I'll open it up for others. The Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this recommendation, and I don't think that it is a wise consideration in front of us. When we went through the quite detailed budgets in recent weeks and considered various categories and programs, we had advice come to us that almost all of the carry forwards are committed and half of next year's capital budget is committed. Within the budget for the Category 2 and 3 programs, the budget there was quite small. And if I recall correctly, it was also around compliance or programs to address imminent failure. So I don't think this is a wise consideration to make because it's assuming that nothing else will be delivered. In terms of the comparison to other councils, I think it's not a like-for-like situation. We don't know the starting point for what their budgets and investments are. We don't know the condition of their assets. We don't know the urgency of their renewals. It's not a like-for-like comparison because they could have started 5 times higher than we have, and so their paring back might still be double of what we're looking to invest. I think to be realistic would be to vote against this and continue with the program that we debated a couple of weeks ago. one of our priorities, I think, heading into what's forecasted as a potential recession should be keeping on top of our infrastructure. And I don't think that this is the year to pare this back. So I will not be supporting this.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I will be supporting this. I think you make a really good point, Mr Mayor, around that it's not just in the COVID years that we've struggled to get these type of work programs out. Our track record, looking backwards, we've never hit like an $80 million work plan. And so I think that's a really valid point. And so why should we be putting financial provision and expectation on our staff and pressure on our city to get that type of work program out? And so therefore I'm very comfortable around this. I like the idea that there's room for the management to come back and confirm that for our final council meeting. I think one of the other benefits it brings is it brings about a better focus on the programs that are left to actually get activated. And yeah, and so I think there's workplace pressure, I think there's contracting, supply chain, all those issues. And I just feel like this is a better move forward, and we should have done it years ago, to be honest. But we just got to peer back. I think there is the ambition, but I think this is reality. And looking back on track records and fair expectation. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this. I do have some sympathy for the feeling that we've got an ambitious capital budget. I totally understand that. And, you know, in the past, we haven't achieved it all, and I also understand that. And as a result of that, I was one of the people, amongst some other councillors, who put forward proposed reductions to the capital spend in the debate 2 weeks ago, not all of which were supported, I would say. If this had come to us as a series of recommendations to reduce capital budgets of individual projects, where we as governance could have input into what was done, then I would certainly have looked at it with an open mind. But I'm not going to support a across-the-board 15% reduction where we have no input into what is actually being reduced. This, to me, is reminiscent of what Council did 2 years ago when we gave the hospital pass to the CE, where we reduced rates and said, well, we're reducing OPEX, you decide where the cuts are. That's not responsible governance. And whilst I can see that, you know, it is a high capital spend, and I think it's fair to say that we may well not achieve it, despite best efforts, this kind of general reduction across the board without giving direction, I'm not prepared to support.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I take this reduction quite seriously, and when it came, I've been right through the plan. And so I first looked at the renewals. Now, we are doing really well with renewals. So I'm not prepared to touch renewals. That's our maintenance budgets. So you take the renewals, which is 32 million off that 96, and you get 64 million left. Now I've been through all the budgets. So our safe community budget is 4 million. So we've just voted about the dog pound. Are you going to slice that off there? So take 4 million off 64, you've got 60 left. Active communities, we've got their biggest budget, it's only 3 million. Their biggest budget is reserves. And we've already deferred $1.5 million of that. So you're going to take $1.5 million off reserves. So if you do, that brings the budget down to 58. I'm going to go through these one by one because it's so important that you do not vote for this. Arts and Heritage is only a $5 million budget. The biggest budget in there is $2.5 million for seismic. So take that off there, 56. And these are only ballpark figures. We get to the city shaping, that's only $2 million, and there's a whole lot of little bits and pieces in there. So nothing big to cut. Connected communities. So that's $6 million. So you're going to slice off $4 million for the social housing because that's the biggest. So take $4 million off that, you're left with 52. Something for 1.4 million, and I can't remember, but that budget's not big. Active transport and public and the roading, there's $10 million of urban growth in there. That's all our subdivisions and all that. So that's got to happen. So you take $10 million off that. Our roading budget's only 20 million. Then you get to stormwater. The stormwater's only 2 million, so you're not going to touch that. That's our core business. So we get into the wastewater. That's $7 million. So our biggest thing in there is the BPO. That's 3.5 million. So you're going to play around with the BPO? I don't think so. So we get down to water. That's $6 million. And I'm not touching anything to do with water. So the rest of the budgets, if you do a ballpark figure, you've got about $30 million left. So you're going to slash 70% of that budget if you're going to take $15 million out. So it's absolutely ridiculous. We started off with our annual plan at $74 million, new capital, at the beginning, this was the first year of and we've already taken $10 million out, which we went through 2 weeks ago. So please, councillors, don't do this. It will be the biggest mistake and it will just cost you more. And instead of your instead of your shelter being 7 million, all the rest of it, in 2 or 3 years' time, you'll have another $20 million because of, plus your 15 that you've just cut because all the expenses have gone down. So please do not do this.
Councillor McLeod.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I should have removed myself from the queue because Councillor Betty has made the point very well, so it's very hard to follow after that.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I won't support it. This figure of $15 million, I don't really think there's much in the way of sort of business thinking that's actually gone behind that, as Councillor Beattie has really sort of pointed out. I have severe concerns around the impacts of work which is already contracted or engaged. I have very severe concerns around the impacts on future years, impacts on the integrity of our long-term plan. And I guess the last point I'd like to make is that history will tell us that austerity is not a pathway to success. So please don't vote for it.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're some way into the debate, but I did have a question because I haven't seen this yet until it came here in terms of officer comment around impact. Could we have a response from officers around impact?
I did ask, but nobody got back to us. But yeah, I'll let Sarah speak because she's actually the one in charge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I'm not sure if the Chief Exec wants to come in on the decision-making piece. The impact, thank you for the question, Councillor. I do appreciate it. We gave you, sorry to go back to the papers from last time, but on the 26th of May, we gave you papers showing you the ratings of impacts of cutting budgets, essentially from 4, no real impact, to 0, 1, 2, which are all those sort of legally compliant, safety, public safety sort of things. I think when you look at the impact, because a lot of the category 4, the low risk stuff, has already been cut, there's only 2 million in categories 3 and 4 left in the capital new budget. this is of the stuff that's not contracted yet. So there's only 2 million in the low-risk stuff left. If you went for the things that are, we've said are probably at imminent failure point, we could be a year out, but if you looked at those, in the capital new, there's only 3.5 in that. So that's 5.5 million. That would mean that the other 9.5, if you're looking at capital new, would have to come out of the things that we've said have a legal or compliance aspect. So it would need, councillor direction, because they are potentially quite impactful cuts.
All right. Councillor, is there anything else you want to comment on?
Yeah, well, thank you. That answer has been very helpful. And I think it really just brings to light the absolute false economy that's been put in front of us by suggesting this blanket cut of $15 million when we're hearing that that's going to come by deferral of things that are in the imminent failure category, things that are in the legal compliance and requirement category. Others, and most notably Councillor Beattie, has spoken well to the falseness of that economy. The point that I would raise is that we are also approaching this from entirely the wrong end of it if we think that we would want to support this. Because most of those arguments have been hung off this idea that, you know, it's 50% versus 70% versus 90% completion, which, yeah, it's great to be able to go and brag to other councils about what your completion rate is. But the reality on the ground of delivering capital projects is you have no crystal ball. You do not know in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months what projects are going to be able to be advanced, what projects will be constrained, what those constraints will be. And why would you set up a system where today you tell officers that they have to now make cuts and basically tie one hand behind their back for the next 12 months without the ability to adaptively manage across a range of capital requirements? Every time we go out for consultation with the community, we hear about the state of our infrastructure. Anytime you drive down the road, you feel the state of our infrastructure coming up through your shocks and suspension. We're already spending less on capital renewal on roads than we were last year. Think about that. We're already spending less on one of the most dire parts of our city infrastructure, and now you want to go for another 15 million? No way.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I am going to support it, and the reason why I'm supporting it is because of performance of what we've done, and it's basically that we've only achieved 39%, and so that's why I'm supporting it. It's for the fact that we are rating our community for something that we actually aren't achieving, so I'm doing it for that reason. So that's why I'm painting that picture. So I will support this motion.
Okay, no further people in the queue. I'll go back to you, Councillor, for right of reply.
Thank you. I do just want to clear up a few, misunderstandings perhaps with elected members. I'm not proposing that we cut anything that is due for imminent failure. That's the reason that I've suggested for this not to be targeted towards the capital renewals. We've increased significantly our investment into capital renewals for that very reason. It is also not intended to be touching the things that we need to be addressing legal compliance. So I just want to make that really clear. We've got a $64 million capital new program currently. If we take 15 million out of that, as I said, 59 million of that is for an increased level of service. I'm suggesting this is targeted towards programs that are involving an increased level of service. So if we take 15 million off the 64, we're left with 49 million capital new program. That's well beyond what we've ever delivered before. The biggest delivery that we've had so far is a 63 million total delivery in 2021, and of that 39 million was capital new. And that was the biggest capital new program that we ever delivered, and if you recall, that included about 17 million into the arena. So that one program was a substantial amount of that. So even 49 million capital new is an absolutely aspirational target in terms of delivery. And I'm proposing this is because I think this is the pragmatic and sensible way forward, to have a realistic plan that's deliverable and that's actually going to help staff to be able to focus on a realistic plan rather than trying to scramble to deliver what is something that is incredibly unrealistic. I also, Councillor Johnson mentioned that 2 weeks ago we didn't make as much progress as we would have hoped, and I certainly am someone that came away from that 15 hours and looking at where we got to, and certainly we had made some good progress that I was pleased that we made. However, I wasn't expecting that only one or two of us would have been putting things on the table for discussion, and certainly once we got to 5 o'clock on Friday, I didn't think that elected members would be prepared to stay to continue a further list of reductions. So I have got a further list of reductions that I would be putting on the table this afternoon if this vote fails. But my preference would be for us to do it this way. It's tidier, it's simpler, it hands it to the staff to identify and prioritise in terms of based on what they know. So, yeah, I think we owe it to our community to be honest with them. I'm not suggesting that officers are not being honest with us, but I think they're being overly aspirational and overly optimistic when they say they can deliver $96 million capital program. It's just not even realistic or reasonable in the current environment. Bringing this down would still be an $81 million program, and that will still be added to come August. I'd put money on it. We always have carry forwards. So I'm urging you to consider this as the sensible way forward. It's not intended primarily to be reducing the rates. It has a small rates impact, but it has more of an impact in outer years. But it's more about having integrity in the plan that we have, having a plan that's deliverable, and I think this is the best way forward.
Okay, we will vote. Thank you. And that has failed. 7 votes for and 9 against. All right. Okay, councillors, we will break and adjourn this meeting till after economic development. And the chair, Councillor Harpiter, I'll leave you till 1 o'clock, and then we'll carry on our debate of this Committee of Council thereafter.